Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Raman. I welcome you all to ATD Summit. I'm thankful to ATD for giving me this opportunity to share with you some nuggets. I'm a performance and learning scientist. I research, write, speak, and train in the area of speeding up employee development and on the methods how to shorten time to proficiency. I'm a corporate learning leader at a Hall of the Fame training organization at a $30 billion US corporation. I design complex face-to-face and online training programs. Today, I intend to give you some insights from research on how to design better e-learning or online training. Let me show you something real quick. A couple of months back, I received Microsoft HoloLens 2 headset. I must say that it's awesome technology. But for the first time when I got it, I had a little hard time figuring this out, how to work it through. I was browsing through menus and looking at some YouTube videos, then playing randomly with some controls. In the meantime, my 7-year-old kid came. He played with those controls for a while with his kiddish, keenness. Guess what? In few minutes, he was up and running, chasing some 3D animals or inbuilt games for an hour. See how fast he learned. The lesson here is that if e-learning aids and tools are designed correctly, it can actually accelerate learning and mastery over the things. That's exactly the foundation of this presentation today. Let's explore how we can design e-learning and online training in a way that could help our employees to master new skills at a much faster rate. Let's first talk about an employee's journey. An employee's journey starts when he or she is hired in a new role. We give them some starting point through onboarding programs. We provide them with training on essential skills they need for the job. Then they do the job with some on-the-job support before they become fully proficient in their jobs. The proficiency means mastering something, some skill or task or even a function. It also means independently productive. The research-based definition is that proficiency is a point when employees deliver results consistently, repeatedly, reliably, and independently. The organizations strive for that proficiency state. But to reach that state, it takes time. We call that time as time to proficiency. Time to proficiency in any job role is measured from the day of starting into a role to the point when employees actually become fully proficient. For instance, today a semiconductor equipment repair engineer takes about 3 years to reach that stage. It's massive time in terms of investment, isn't it? Deloitte did a study on 10,000 executives in 2017 and stated that the speed and agilities are far more important than the efficiency to survive in the business. It's the speed with which you develop the performance of your workforce. The idea is to reduce that long time to proficiency of an employee. That reduction in time to proficiency is simply dollars, productivity, retention, and opportunity cost. There is undoubtedly a money value of time. When you reduce time to proficiency faster than your competitors, you stay ahead in the market. Also, there is third thing. The life period of a skill is well below 2 years now. Not just for new hires. You all have seen during pandemic how badly you needed current employees to master new things, new solutions, and new technologies at a very, very high pace. And we all fall back using e-learning during those times. But not all organizations got consistent results using e-learning. That's why we are here. How can we design e-learning and online training to accelerate that path to proficiency for our employees? I conducted a massive study with over 70 world-class organizations who had the success stories to have shortened time to proficiency of their employees. The study involved 85 world-class leaders across 42 industries and some 20 business sectors. I studied 66 successful projects in different types of jobs like sales, finance, technologies, etc. While my question was about overall strategy to shorten time to proficiency, what I found is that several organizations used a range of e-learning and technology-based training solutions as one of their practices to shorten time to proficiency. My research generated a lot of breakthrough strategies, but for today's presentation, we are going to focus only on e-learning part. I'll give you some powerful insights how e-learning design looked like at those organizations and how you could replicate the same too. I found that there are 5 design strategies to accelerate proficiency. More often, we tend to focus only on either the design or the delivery of the strategies. And we pretty much forget about learners' experience. What I found is that for an effective e-learning or online training design, you first need to design the learning, then you need to design the experience which a learner would get, and then you also need to design the delivery. Delivery simply is not a separate thing from design. It is part of the design. So let's talk about each of these strategies one by one. The first one is to design the entire online training through contextualization. This is foremost training design strategy. In day-to-day life, our employees solve problems. They need to think of the solution and then they need to handle several challenges. That requires higher order thinking and problem solving skills. So those skills need to be embedded as scenarios, problem, cases, simulation, or games in our online training. That technique is called contextualization. Gone are the days when online training was about imparting content, information, or slides. There are several names to this strategy. You call it case-based curriculum, problem-based e-learning, scenario-based simulation, simulator scenarios, gaming or gamification, or even strategic rehearsals. How one can do it? The idea is to gamify the real-world scenarios. Scenarios can be real or fabricated, but need to be something that is likely to happen in the job. Goal is to introduce intentional errors, obstacles, hardships, and challenges into the scenarios in a very non-linear fashion, in a way that a learner would encounter in the real life. These deliberate difficulties must be realistic, not just for the sake of making learning harder or challenging. The part of my research suggested that when you add a series of failure into learning or online learning, the learning actually get accelerated tremendously. You could give a problem or scenario to learner and then you can ask them to analyze it, solve it, describe the root cause, provide the recommendation, make a decision, choose best options. These things trigger deeper thinking and also introduce a great amount of emotional loading. These scenarios-based approaches create pressure and emotional involvement on the learners. It makes learning very active and it sticks because it is immediately relevant to the job. They are more likely to remember when they apply it in the context of the problems. Every single organization in my research used these strategies as first line of defense. The first set of examples are basically computer-based online scenarios. I'm sure many of you have seen these things before. For instance, scenarios like step-by-step emergency CPR to a patient. It puts across certain situations and you need to choose the correct options in those situations. The simplest version you might have seen in good old days, text-based cases like choosing the right path. Those things work equally good as long as those are tied to the job. One of the financial organizations developed an expert system with web interface which held a repository of previous company cases. The cases were presented to new financial analysts progressively, which were required to then solve these cases. The result was that they could rapidly prepare these new employees at a much shorter time. Other set of online trainings are designed like simulated games, similar to the strategy games with immersive interfaces. Now they call it as virtual worlds, in which entire entire ecosystem is around a situation is designed. I came across a company in my research which is offering building totally virtual underground mines that one can navigate with their headsets. The virtual world is equipped with additional features like smoke or heat emitting devices to make the feel real. So participant would need to feel what it means to handle underground fire situation in the event it occurs. Chances of which are very rare, but one cannot wait for a real fire to occur to practice the skills. Now it's evolving into AR or VR based immersive environment. For instance, US military is using VR simulated combat exercises for the military training. In such online learning, you could play with various variables and change it to present different or harder scenarios to learners to solve. Even the firefighters training is being done virtually with more realistic games. In the recent times, immersive technology and simulation based e learning has also been used to teach complex surgical skills to the medical professionals. However, I do want to make a point that while you may have seen all these things to teach content, functions, or methods, the organizations who indeed made the difference in speeding up time to proficiency, they focused on designing and exposing their employees to well designed scenarios, cases, or problems. The things go wrong when we start building slides and other content pieces like videos to create e-learning packages. Nevertheless, this is the single most effective e-learning strategy that can accelerate people's learning toward proficiency. So the question for you is that are you leveraging this powerful online training design strategy? If not, then look at all the tasks you are targeting in online learning. Use the design question. What task does require deeper thinking and solving of a range of problems to achieve business outcomes? You all have heard that the attention span is going down to 8 seconds these days, isn't it? But before you take that statement literally, you need to be aware of the context. This is a purely social media context, not a learning context. When you push unsolicited content or information to people, they spend only few seconds figuring out you want to click it or not. In the learning domain, if I know that a given skill will make me successful in my job, no matter what, I will hold my attention as long as needed. I know the consequences if I don't. That's what I call emotional loading. So don't get too much hung up on a non-contextual statement about 8-second attention span. But the truth is that research does suggest that learning must happen in shorter chunks to be effective. Each chunk should cover not more than few learning outcomes at a time. But making small chunks of learning does not work alone to accelerate proficiency. There is few things you're gonna need to know. There are three pieces to this strategy. Number one is, of course, making the learning in smaller chunks. The approach is called segmenting, chunking, or micro learning. That makes sense because people don't have enough time. If you could design smaller chunks, each chunk focusing on, say, one learning outcome at a time, you can make online learning almost painless. But how long should be one chunk? That's very debatable. But there are some pieces of research and certain evidence that suggest some numbers. For example, TED Talks are designed maximum to be 18 minutes. They consulted several scientific studies and found that proximity of 20 minutes was a sweet spot for learning worthy talk. More than that, it becomes unbearable. And the talk should not cover more than one learning outcome. The latest research by Microsoft suggests that a virtual sessions like the one we are having today should not be longer than 2 hours. That's when you get the serious content that must be learned. But organizations sometimes are too interested in offering day-long virtual sessions to save their resource cost. So the chunk could depend or vary depending upon amount of information and level of skills to be learned. Where the mistake happens is when learning designers makes lots of chunks, but then having the learners do 20, 30, or 40 chunks of information back to back in the same session. That defeats the purpose. That's where the second piece of strategy comes: spacing or distributing these chunks out in time. This is a strategy for designing effective online learning, and it complements the one using scenario based contextualization. But spacing alone does not work. There is a third piece to it, which is called interleaving. The idea actually is to space out these micro learning chunks and then interleave it with other tasks and activities that would allow more practice and more reflection. These can be varied type of task, assignment that would allow learners to internalize those smaller chunks. Most of the online training fail because it lacks moments of reflections. So the question for you to reflect now is that in your settings, are you chunking, spacing, and interleaving the micro learning segments to build a solid online training? If not, then you may need to reassess this question. Which skill can be packed in shorter e-learning units that can be applied immediately at the job? Not all the skills or content would qualify for micro learning, by the way. So be selective, okay? For instance, a skill which can be better attained by reading a document, it is okay to give them 20 pages of a document, and it should not be overly broken down into pieces, because then you will lose the effectiveness. The next strategy is to build an optimal e-learning path. This is a key piece to designing the online learning experience. At workplace, people don't learn just by sitting in front of computer. They need to do a certain task, need to practice on something, need to deliver something for the job. They need to participate or conduct some assignments. All of these, including the learning activities, online learning modules, or other training activities, need to be sequenced optimally to enable them to reach the desired proficiency in a shorter time. What I observed is that time to proficiency is significantly impacted by carefully sequencing the learning activities, tasks, or assignment in a very efficient path. We call it as learning path or learning pathway. Note that this learning path we are talking about here is not the learning path you have been creating in LMS, which is a painful series of learning modules. Here we're talking about the total journey until someone really reaches the desired proficiency. All right? The idea here is that you select the most essential and relevant learning activities and focus assignments required for a given proficiency goal. Then sequence it how learners should go through it. The goal is to optimize the learning path and make the length of that path short as possible by eliminating the redundant, irrelevant, or wasteful activities in that learning path. The other thing you could do is assess what kind of activity you are really putting into that sequence. For instance, if you are creating a training course for a facility analysts, they might need to create some specific government audit report once in 5 years. Is there a point teaching them this skill now, which they would not be using for 5 years? So you must look at what kind of skills you are putting, how soon those skills are going to be needed. Is it the best use of time, or is it the waste of time right now? Now, when you start putting time targets on each item on that sequence, learning is automatically accelerated, or at least you know how long it would take to finish that sequence. This path you may not be able to do alone, by the way. You need the direct manager's involvement in establishing it. In my research, I found that just by creating the optimal learning sequence, the organizations were able to shorten the time to proficiency by 30%. So the question for you is, are you leveraging this powerful thought process in your settings? If not, then you need to get started by asking a question. What e-learning activities make someone reach proficiency quickly? And what activities do not lead to proficiency? So think about that in your settings. Electronic performance support system are resources like online learning content, reference material, knowledge base, procedures, mobile application, decision making software. Performance support system comes in various shapes and forms. And here is a list of 8 categories of performance support system which are most commonly used by organizations. All of these can provide just-in-time training or just-in-time support, as simple as checklist or job aids, or even more sophisticated like AR-based job instruction, contextual on-screen help, decision support software, AI-based search engines. These all are performance support system. Others may include like very straightforward but easy to implement. For example, on the go push notification on employees' mobile phones, chatbots, skill self assessment, and procedures. All of these are categories of performance support system. Performance support system can simply be a learning delivery resource like LMS from where to get the self-paced content, on-demand videos. It may be document repository of organization, or it can simply be a repository of YouTube video. The primary goal is to get learning on demand just in time when someone needs it. One thing worth observing is that organizations who reduce time to proficiency heavily, they rely on performance support system rather than on training. In fact, in several project cases, what I saw is they even replaced training completely using performance support system. For example, one call center in the US used to provide 11 weeks of instructor-led training to their agents. And on top of that one, these agents would take 3 more months to become fully proficient. So what this organization did is, instead they provided them a software which gave employees on-screen contextual help depending upon which step they were on or which screen they were looking at. So it gave them a series of questions that they should be asking the client, and it also gave them the guidance real time that when and how a call should be escalated. So imagine when I have that kind of instruction in front of me, I possibly don't need to go through 11 weeks of training. All I need is a little orientation about how to use that software help, and I'm good to perform on my job. And I can be on my job providing the deliverable to management in a much shorter time. So essentially, performance support systems are not only the on-demand, just-in-time source for learning modules, but it needs to be integrated into the workflow so that the employees can use it when they need it, and they can seek the support, seek the answers when they really feel the need for it. So I want to share one observation that the organizational training now is no longer an event where employees need to be invited, but it is now more of something that happens automatically as employees seek assistance on the job from electronic performance support system. So what's your performance support strategy? When you design online training, you need to ask a design question. What skills can be delivered through performance support system to provide just-in-time support the moment when an employee needs it or asks for it? Look here that it's not pushing or forcing employees to learn. Part of this question you need to look at is what's available to employees when they are doing a job, or what new tools can be made available that basically either reduce the requirement of training or it completely eliminates the need for training. So think about that. The next strategy we are going to talk about is how experience-rich and multi-technology mix can accelerate training. When I conducted my research back in 2018, several of these things I observed with the leading organizations were not prevailing that in the market at that time. And but now we are finding more and more use of these techniques in our COVID-19 world. And in fact, a lot of these methods has already been implemented by several organizations. I'm sure that what I'm going to share in this strategy, many of you may have already started doing it. So I just want to give you a framework to think about it systematically. So what's your strategy? If you don't have any, you need to think which e-learning channel or technology can deliver intended skill. to provide an enriched experience or a deeper learning to the learners. In simpler terms, the approach I'm advocating is that called blended approach. But the major mistake with online program is that we tend to blend only one or two channels of learning. For instance, you may use live Zoom session and then you may put up a recorded video on a platform to view it later. On other instance, it could be on all online recorded videos. But in normal setting, you need to engage several senses to encode the information and knowledge in your brain. You need to read, you need to listen, you need to watch, you need to write, you need to use hands, you need to use senses or feel. The study shows that when all senses are involved in learning, skill acquisition is accelerated heavily. Then why don't we practice this while designing online learning? In my research, I noticed that by providing multiple experience-rich channels of information and content delivery to enrich the learning becomes better. Don't just download information onto the learners. Use several tools like a breakout, create a buddy system, ask them to present their case, run a challenge or a competition, make them participate in discussion forum, have them do some demonstration, including reporting back their field work. E-learning or online learning does not have to be limited to screen-based work only, okay? Now virtual, hybrid, blended, and then virtual reality modes are available to you that gives you tons of options to develop multiple routes for learning. You can mix several learning channels together and the combination of these channels indeed accelerate the time to proficiency. Leverage and mix all of these channels. Don't stick to one specific way of designing or delivering online training. That was the last strategy to design and deliver effective online training and e-learning. Here are the 5 e-learning strategies I talked about as a recap. In my research, what I found is that each of these 5 strategies were indeed powerful of its own. However, one needs to implement these as a system to accelerate skill acquisition. Interestingly, there was a cyclic relationship. If you create a large scenario, your best bet is to chunk these scenarios down into smaller segments and then progressively build skills to solve the scenarios. Or other way around, if you chunk the content, your best bet is to make sure each chunk is self-contained scenario, which later you can interleave with assignments that force them to use learning from scenarios. In addition to cyclic relationship, each of these strategies had dependency on other 4. There were one-to-many relationship as well. So a reasonable starting point to leverage these one-to-many relationship is that you start with a mindset to develop learning through intense thinking and problem solving. You build intentional bugs into cases, scenarios, or problems, and then present it to learners to ensure appropriate level of emotional loading. At the same time, you need to look at is how to chunk these scenarios into smaller segments, which could be spaced out. Then you look for additional practice and reflection exercise that must be interleaved between 2 chunked segments. And then you look at that one, how you're going to sequence all of these interleaved assignment in the form of a lean learning path that allows you to shorten the time. So on the learning path, you map out the activities, assignment, project, and what sequence it needs to happen with the goal that you remove the irrelevant or wasteful activities. So that will give you the total journey and a learner needs to go through. So part of the thing about this overall journey is you also decide whether certain thing needs to be taught using videos or online learning modules, whether they need to read certain content, or whether you're going to provide them a performance support system which they can use at their job instead of learning the content. Whereas using performance support system, they can simply access that particular skill at the time they need it. And once you are done with the overall journey, you have designed the learning path, then you employ multi-sensory interaction and use different technologies, different modalities in order to deliver the experience to your learners. All right. Here is a quick snapshot of 5 guide questions that would help you to implement the strategies. And you will see that there is a core at the center in this model. Let me explain that a bit. At the core of all these strategy is one guiding philosophy that employees don't perform tasks these days. They need to think, they need to make decisions. If your goal is to design e-learning specifically for accelerating proficiency, then do make sure that you ground e-learning or online learning design to build moments of critical thinking, moments of deeper reflections, and moments of problem solving. So everything you design in e-learning needs to be in context of the job rather than in context of the learning. When your goal becomes delivering learning, you tend to become more content focused. But the moment your focus is on results, you become proficiency focused. And more importantly, the mistake we always do is designing e-learning that only delivers content and not skills. Key idea here is to stay to the core. Keep your focus on skills rather than information or content download. You need to give realistic challenges as much as possible with emotional loading, as much as visible to learner, to encode that learning deeply, which will in turn accelerate it for professional proficiency. Use multiple experience-rich channels, and you can leverage a range of resources available to you to deliver learning in such a way that it is near to the point of need or application in context of the job. Once you make it contextual, you speed up learning at an imaginable rate. I hope I have added value to you today and eased your design challenges a bit. I invite you to connect with me on any of the social media channels I have displayed over here. If you want to learn more about how to speed up time to proficiency at workplace, I invite you to join me in a community of like-minded professionals and experts. It's called ExpertX. My research is freely available through that forum. Follow the links to be part of that community. Lastly, you may want to look for the books I have authored on this topic. My books range from how to accelerate skill acquisition to how to speed up expertise. Check out at Amazon. It has been my pleasure to make a difference in your learning. Thank you so much.